I've had a bit of a change of heart this week. Tony Blair led the country into a disastrous war. He cozied up to George W. Bush, and since leaving office has racked up untold millions, courting the world's political and even showbiz elite. And yet, things have become so unbearable in British politics that this week I actually found myself relieved to hear from him. Tony Blair is the world's most unlikely revolutionary, but listening to him call upon British people to rise up instead of accepting Brexit as a done deal, I felt inspired. Even if you don't agree with what Blair had to say, at least he is taking a stand. The fact is, hard Brexit is not what people voted for. They weren't asked. And by taking us out of the single market and the customs union, we are likely to be worse off, even though we were told we would have things better. Somebody has to stand up to this madness. And if Blair is the only one with the credentials and the confidence to do it, then yo Blair, count me in.
I'm not sure yours is the most popular view in the country in some ways at the moment. I'm not sure everyone's walking around going, yo, Blair. But the thing that was interesting about it was he said, rise up. And I thought that was quite interesting. If you voted to remain, rise up. So I was asking people how they have been rising up since Tony Blair called for a rebellion. And if you remember, there was an interesting time when he was in charge that people did rise up against the Iraq war, and he wasn't the biggest fan of it. I have no problem with him wading in. He's a free citizen. He's a former Prime Minister. It's interesting to hear what he has to say. And I live in a country which is very proud of free speech. So really, I have no problem either way, whether he wades in or doesn't wade in. He claims it's not a return to frontline politics, so we believe what he has to say. He doesn't grant interviews very often. I'm sure everyone here has tried in their time to get him to speak when they want him to speak. He only speaks when he wants. The only thing I would say, and I don't enjoy if you don't mind me saying, the reference to how much money he's made. I think it's irrelevant. I think people hold that over him in a way that if they had been in his position, they would do exactly the same as long as it's legal and he's paying tax. So I think that's always a bit crass and a bit of a cheap shot. But the only thing I would say is it has been suggested he is doing this to restore his reputation. And people, when they look at their legacy, a political legacy, they want to be remembered in a good way. So there is a cynicism some people have about it. Some of the cartoons in the newspapers sent him up for that. And I think that at least taps into how some people feel who aren't so excited about Tony Blair's return to frontline politics a way.
Should we just have a listen to what he had to say? Because we've got a little clip of it here.
One of the reasons it's so important to have this movement is that right now, where's the pressure on the government? Right? The pressure's all one way. The pressure's from the right-wing cartel of papers who will beat them up and beat anyone up who dares suggest that anything other than Brexit at any cost is the right path for the country.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he's not the ideal person to be the messenger. But I do want to just pick up on what you said, Emma, because I think that the money he's made is relevant. Because what's happening in this country and what's happening in America, which I think I can relate to on some level, is this sense that there is this liberal metropolitan elite in cities like London who are doing very well, who are out of touch with how people feel. And I think for many people, Blair represents that because he does move in this financial, showbiz, international circuit, which people feel very distant from. But he's the only person saying it. If no one else in Labour seems to be able to get it together to represent what a lot of people are feeling, you know, the large minority who voted Remain feel completely left behind at the moment.
The money's relevant, the history's relevant, and his reputation is relevant, and people don't trust him. So the sentiment of people having a voice that, you know, that would prefer that the UK had remained, I think is fair enough. Of course, it's important to have debate on both sides and try to represent views shared by sort of common interests, whether they're Remainers or Leavers, to what future we have. It's such a massive decision for the country, biggest decision of a generation. But ultimately, I think he's the wrong person because he's got so much baggage. And people don't trust his motives that, you know, whilst some of what he said I thought would resonate with some people, I think he could do more damage in a sense because it will just continue to polarise opinion where actually what needs to be represented is all of those people in the middle, the people that wanted to leave for very good reasons from their point of view, the people that had rational reasons for wanting to stay, and therefore those are the people that need to be represented.
Let's see how it went down with another heavyweight politician, and I mean currently heavyweight politician, the Foreign Secretary.
This is the guy who would have taken our country into the euro with what would have been catastrophic consequences. This is the guy who dragooned the United Kingdom into the Iraq War on a completely false prospectus, with consequences which foreign ministers here are still trying to deal with. So I respectfully say to Tony Blair, those who call on the British people to rise up against Brexit, I urge the British people to rise up and turn off the TV next time Blair comes on with his condescending campaign.
Now, personally, I prefer Boris in his jogging gear, but he can't wear it, I suppose, in the workplace. What I found was extraordinary was he opened up by saying, I am not here to defy the will of the people, and then spent 45 minutes explaining why he did want to defy the will of the people. He said, I don't want to get personal about the Prime Minister.
Nick.
And then about 5 minutes on, he did get personal about the Prime Minister. But I will just say this. Anybody watching this who fears there will never be a Brexit, don't worry. Because the fact that Tony Blair has done this is a man... It means that Brexit is absolutely certain.
Mission accomplished.
This is a man who took us into war on a lie. This is a man who promised education, and our schools, since he's been in, have unfortunately consistently gone down at the attainment league tables. And this is a man who could have had that vote if he'd wanted to, at a time where he actually probably would have kept Britain in the European Union, but he didn't have the cojones to keep a European theme going to do it. So don't worry, Brexit is assured.
Rachel.
On the Foreign Secretary's response to what Tony Blair said, I think we have to say, in all fairness, that my brother voted for the Iraq War. So to dob Tony Blair in on Iraq and the fact that millions of people protested against Iraq was a tiny bit rich from the Foreign Secretary. Everybody's right.
I mean, Tony
Blair, everything, like Nick Clegg, I agreed with every word that Tony Blair said. The problem was he was the wrong man to say it. It was the right speech from the wrong man at the wrong time. It was all insight, and he has absolutely no standing to say it. That was the problem. So what we need to... He actually spoke for Open Britain. Now, if we want the momentum to build, and when you say the will of the people, Nick, you forget that 16 million people did not vote for Brexit. Exactly. You say the will of the people as if the entire country now wants Brexit to happen. You've got to accept that is not the case. So the question is, Blair was the wrong guy. How do we move forward on this? And I think we accept Brexit's going to happen, and I think Remain has to almost do emergency surgery after the operation has taken place. It's going to be this weird thing that's going to happen. We can't stop the operation, but the emergency surgery has to take place afterwards. When we see the deal is rubbish, then they have to go back and get a better deal.
I don't know if I agree, Rachel, but Graham...
Well, no, I mean, I back to my original point, which was that there's a huge group of people in the middle, so Leavers as well as Remainers, that actually don't want an extreme version of Brexit, want something that is going to offer them what they were promised to an extent, and deliver on the main subjects or the main topics of what was sold to them as you know, why we should leave the EU. Now, the fact is, this is such unknown territory that we're in a mess. We're going to be in a mess for a long time, because ultimately we might all agree on what Brexit looks like to us in the UK, but then we've got to rely on 27 other countries to bat it around and keep sending it back to us. Yeah. So ultimately what we have to do, I think we have to try and be as rational as we can, not just jump on every statistic as it comes out saying, oh, look, that proves Brexit's working and that proves it's not going to work. This is going to take years and years and years to deal with. So we've got to have a rational approach to it, where we actually do take big chunks of the country into consideration in terms of their opinions. Now, who does that and how it's done, that's the question that you have to ask back. Tony Blair isn't that person.
I mean, I think we all agree that Tony Blair is not the ideal messenger, you know, and I completely agree with that.
I don't think we all do agree on that.
OK.
I'm sorry, just to say... He's a former Prime Minister. We hear from John Major, we hear from other former Prime Ministers in other countries quite regularly. That might be your view, but we believe in freedom of speech in this country, and you advocate freedom of speech all the time.
If you look at it from a party political perspective, you know, Tony Blair is kind of symbolises for many Labour voters the reason they feel alienated by Westminster politics. He's toxic. He really is toxic. I don't want to use that word lightly. But I have to pick up on what you said, Nick. You know, this idea that the will of the people is this kind of like immovable monolith and this sacrosanct thing. Democracy is about give and take. It's about back and forth. You know, when we voted Brexit by the majority, we weren't voting on the terms of the deal, we weren't voting hard or soft, we weren't voting about the single market. You can't tell me what the will of the people is when it comes to the details, and that's why it's our duty, if we don't agree with what's happening, to speak up about it. And I agree, Tony Blair's not ideal. Who's better? I mean, somebody tell me who you would like to be
Well, I was going to segue nicely into the use of the word toxic that you used about 10 minutes ago, but unfortunately that moment's gone. But anyway.